Romans chapter 3, verse 9. I want to talk about this one verse. I think it's very important to understand what is about to happen in the next eight verses. What Paul does in Romans chapter 3, verse 9 is he uses the words, "What then?" which is a summary, basically, of all of everything that Paul has been talking about, probably since Romans chapter 1, verse 18. And he says, what then? Are we better than they? And the we in this part of the verse is the Jews. Are we Jews better than they Gentiles? And he says, no, not at all. For we apostles have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin. So Paul has basically summarized everything that he has said from Romans chapter 1, verse 18 until Romans chapter 3, verse 8. There are some people that debate whether or not in the next eight verses, whether or not Paul is really talking about Greeks. Well, he obviously is talking about Greeks, and because he uses the words in verse 10, as it is written. And by using the words as it is written, he's about ready to explain why both Jews and Greeks are all under sin. So what he says is, no, not at all. We have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin, as it is written. He is saying that both Jews and Greeks are all under sin. He's talking to Jews directly, but he's telling Jews that they are all under sin, just like the Greeks are all under sin. And what we find out in these next 8 verses that Paul is going to recite or write down, or however you want to look at it, is that David and Solomon and probably Isaiah are all doing this. They're doing the same thing. They're equating all men as under sin, especially Proverbs especially Ecclesiastes 7:20. There is no question that Solomon is talking about all men under the sun, every single one of them. And David, in some of the verses that are used by Paul, it seems like David is definitely talking about just Jews, but in Psalms 53, David is pretty much talking about not just Jews, he's talking about Gentiles as well. And there are some things that we need to keep in mind as we read these next 8 verses, and what they are is that David, he will equate liars and boasters, or lying people and prideful people, with murderers, and he'll call them evil men. And what Paul does is he equates liars with unrighteous people. What we need to understand is in our society, people who speak little white lies aren't punished for speaking a little white lie, because it's just a little white lie. It's not really quote unquote harming anybody, which it can actually harm people, but it's considered a little white lie because it's not a big bad lie like Bernie Madoff or some of the big name liars, I guess, if you want to call them that. Those people get punished for 150 years for stealing 100 or however many millions of dollars or billions of dollars in Bernie Madoff's case. However, with God, a society that accepts little white lies as okay is seen as ungodly, an unrighteous society. And with God, every single untruth is the same as every single other untruth, whether it's a little white lie or a massive lie where you're stealing from 1,000 people, or lying to people about their money and essentially taking $21 billion from them. The question that arises, obviously, is why does God perform in this way? And that question actually comes from a human mindset that we have a degree of sins. This lie is real bad, this lie is not as bad, so we don't punish this little tiny lie, but we'll punish this really bad lie. that's why we ask, why does God perform in this way? Because someone says a little white lie, he's not really, doing something severely bad. Well, the reason why God would perform in this way, or thinks in this way, is because it is against the nature of God to lie. God is truth. He speaks truth. He seeks justice in every aspect of life. Whenever we speak an untruth, we are being untruthful. Whether it's a small lie or a big lie, it doesn't matter. What we need to understand is that if our society didn't have a lot of murders or greed or selfishness or really bad things, whatever it is, but our society accepted little white lies as okay, we would still be considered as an ungodly society. And we would be guilty and deserving of the wrath of God for being untruthful. And I think that us as Christians need to watch ourselves, that we do not become accepting of little tiny sins, little sins that we become callous to because it's not as bad as what we could be. Or we watch stuff on TV and we say, well, we're not as bad as that stuff, so we're not, so we're okay. But in fact, God is looking at us completely. He's looking at us in the whole scope of things. Whenever we tell little white lies, we are still being untruthful, whether we are telling little white lies or not. We're still being untruthful. That is what God looks at. If we're just a small amount of pride, we are still being prideful to God. It's still pride that God is against. Pride is pride, or a little white lie is still a lie. And we need to watch ourselves so that we are not accepting of these things. I think we need to pray to God and ask us to help me to see the issues that are in my life, whether they're really small or whether they're really big. It seems like we see the really big issues and we don't see the really small issues. And God has to show us the little small issues that we have in order to be actually change our lives. And as God changes our lives more in the little tiny things, the big things start looking a whole lot bigger than what they used to look like.